from Gaza and Amman, Jordan. She studied linguistics, literature, translation, and politics, 3 degrees at the Islamic University in Gaza, before she came to London to do her master's studies at Goldsmiths in 2015. After completing her master's degree, she worked as a Middle East researcher for a PR startup. She's currently an intelligence analyst at Meta. Welcome, Mason. And the person who came the furthest today from Dundee, Saja Hamdan, a Palestinian writer, researcher, raised in Gaza. She earned her degree in dentistry from Al-Azhar University, Gaza, before receiving the humanitarian scholarship to pursue a master's degree in public health at the University of Dundee. Now a PhD candidate at Queen's University, Belfast, her work focuses on health system in conflict zones and socio-political determinants of healthcare. Deeply committed to justice and human rights, Saja uses both her academic and literary voice to amplify the lived experiences of Palestinians. Her first novel was published during the ongoing genocide in Gaza, offering a poignant narrative of survival and memory. Since the start of the bombardment, she has tragically lost several loved ones, a grief that continues to fuel her advocacy and research. Thank you. Welcome. Finally, my story is actually very different. I am British-born, Palestinian heritage. My name is Sam Ammar. Academically, I have a master's degree in global marketing. I started my political career with the Labour Party. I chaired the Labour Party in Bromsgrove and led it to its election results in 2023. I left the Labour Party due to its stance on Palestine just before the general election and the sidelining of candidates and parachuting candidates up and down the country to silence the Palestinian voices. I then stood as an independent. With 3 weeks to go, I ran a campaign, and after quite a few months, I decided to join the Liberal Democrats because I respected the local party, but I did come to Parliament and I saw the leader, PMQ's, question the Prime Minister on his stance on Gaza and sanctioning the ministers, which eventually happened. That was something the Liberal Democrats was pushing for. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming this evening. So I'll go first to Maysam. I'll give you the floor for your speech. Tell us about your story.
Well, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't know I needed to do a speech. But yeah, as you said, I was born in Gaza. I grew up some of my childhood in Amman in Jordan, and then at the start of the Second Intifada, we had to move back to Gaza, and I lived there until I was about 25, when I miraculously left. I don't know how many of you know Dr. Rifat al-Arair, who was tragically killed by the Israelis during the war about a year ago. He was actually the one, like, I tried to cross the border 3 or 4 times. Anyone who knows anything about Gaza before the 7th of October, it feels like there are two parts of the Palestinian history, before and after the 7th of October. But before, believe it or not, Gaza was definitely under a horrific humanitarian crisis, and it was almost impossible to leave. And by a lot of miracles, including Dr. Rifat al-Arair, he messaged me on Facebook at the time, which 10 years later, I'm working at Facebook. He messaged me, I was like, they just called your name. Because I had just given up leaving, actually crossing the border. And I was somewhere at a friend's house near the Rafah crossing, and he was like, come here right now, like they just called your name. And that message definitely changed my life, and here I am 10 years in the UK. I just got my British citizenship. I spent the last 5 years working at one of the biggest companies in the world, but never felt smaller in the world, because it was one of those moments when, you know, as Gazans and as Palestinians in general, like, we don't feel like we have a choice but not survive, but like actually excel, not for our sake, not for our family's sake. It's just like, it's almost a national duty for us to do well in life. But then you work really hard, you do well, you try 10 times as hard, you reach half as far as a lot of people. And I thought 3 years ago when I got my job at Meta, and like, you know, a job that not just Palestinians, people around the world dream about. And I became like, I don't know, more financially secure, and it's like I was able to provide for my family in Gaza. The war happened, and it was like a stark reminder of no matter how hard you work, how far you go, there will still be times when your money, your hard work, your status will not matter. I have my brother hungry for weeks and days in Gaza right now with his 2 kids, both under 3 years old. And I have the money in the bank and not able to get it to him. I'm not able to like lend that line of survival. So this is just one of many, many stories of Palestinians who are living insane contradictions, especially Palestinians in the UK. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to talk about those, because a few people really understand what it really is like to be a Palestinian who actually made it out, but never really. You can leave Gaza, but Gaza will never leave you. And I'm excited to exploring a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much. I have to say, if you haven't prepared anything, that was just amazing. It does seem you described it as a prison, and you were let out.
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to leave until your name was called.
Yeah, after I've given up, like I literally just took my bags and given up. And Dr. Rifat called me. He messaged me. I was like,
How
They
do
just
you
called
apply
your
to
name.
leave? How do you apply to leave? Like how?
oh, I involved a lot of people. Dr. Sameh Habib, I had there were a few of his friends in Gaza who were involved, and there was a lot of effort because it was one of those scholarships that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to get. And I mobilized a lot of amazing people, amazing Palestinian men behind me who helped me out and managed. Yeah, at the last day, I think it was the last bus leaving Gaza, and then after that, I think the border was closed for another 8 months or something, so I wouldn't have been here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mason. Okay, so I'll move forward to Aman Zannoun. Would you like to take the floor, please?
Sure. So, good evening, everyone. I'll make it short. I was born in 1995, so by the time I became conscious about what's happening around me, it was al-Ishtiyah in the West Bank, where we were under a siege for over 6 months. The first names that came into my mind was Muhammad al-Durra, Iman Hajjo. Both of them were children killed or murdered by the IDF. And I knew them before I could even speak their names properly. And I witnessed al-Ishtiyah. I witnessed how my mom used to bring the molded bread and just use water to remove the mold so we can eat it, because we couldn't access any bakery or supermarket for over 6 months. I remember the tankers, how it used to shake the streets. I remember how we used to force, after a while, to go to school when the tanker was standing actually in front of the school, because otherwise we will miss the year. And by the time I became in my 5th grade, 2005-2006, the other thing that came into my mind was the wall around the West Bank, the apartheid wall. I remember sitting in the school bus and hearing the news. It was Shirin Abu Aqli, who was also murdered by the IDF, saying how illegal under the international law this apartheid wall is. And it was such a bit of hope, thinking that, oh, it's illegal under a certain law somewhere, so perhaps it wouldn't work, but it did. And that actually brought curiosity about international law and human rights to me. What is international law? How it can protect us? I grew up ignoring how this law failed us in the 1948, how this law failed us in the 1976. And I kept hoping that it's our problem. The problem is with us, people who are oppressed. They always think that it's their problem. They can't understand the system very well. It's their problem because they can't access the system. These kind of laws were put by countries like the United States, like Europe, who understand very well the concept of human rights and international law. And therefore, I was very keen to pursue my study and have a master's degree in human rights and international law to understand. And it was a continuous question always to my lecturers. Why, for example, when we speak about the Geneva Convention, why the Palestinian, why there is exception for the Palestinian? And the answer was always, oh, the Palestinian cause is a bit special, it's a bit different. How come it's different? We're human, like you, exactly, out of flesh and blood. We feel, we suffer, so why the Palestinian cause is different? And it was meant to be that I lived my whole life as a witness of how international law fails people, especially the oppressed people. I've witnessed it all. And let's speak about the last war in Gaza. Over 100 violations of international human rights was made. Shall we speak about the deliberate bombing of civilian homes, again for Geneva Convention, Article 147, bombing entire residential neighborhood, again for Geneva Convention, killing of women and children, Article 3. I have a list of 100 violations. It shows you how bad this system is not just failed us, it was built this way. It was built to fail us. And I think the important question over here, what should we tell people? What should we tell, for example, Muhammad? He's 10 years old, he lost both his parents in Gaza, and he's taking care of his sister and his brother as a parent, taking responsibility of securing their food. And they were injured recently, I think 2 weeks ago. And he's taking care of himself as an injured boy, but as a parent for his sister and his brother. What would say to Ibrahim, who was crying in the hospitals for months, saying, my only wish is to get my hand back. I just want my hand back. Or Amira, who thought that she will get another leg after she lost her leg. She thought that her leg can grow again. What will you tell them about the international law, about the human rights? They don't care about that. They want to live. And I think the most important question over here is to ask what next. Is the purpose is to kill all the Palestinians, wipe them out, committing genocide against them? But this is bigger than that. This is the question that raised that what's next? Who's next, rather? It's all of us, unfortunately, because once we have a system that is built this way, it's going to be looking for the next victim and the next victim. So I'm very pleased to be here today, and I'm looking forward to have all your opinion about how much you think that the international law and the human rights actually failed and disappointed the Palestinian cause in a way or another.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilana. Thank you. Very compelling and painful, I think, stories you can see in the room. I think very painful. Thank you. Saja, over to you.
Yeah. So to be honest, I prepared a speech because when I spoke to my mother, when I called my mother yesterday, she's in Gaza, by the way, I told her that I will speak today. She told me, okay, it's not like speaking at the protests as I used to speak at the protests. You should prepare a speech. And I followed. So thank you all for coming here today. As a Palestinian woman from Gaza, I'm here today to share just a small fraction of the immense suffering endured by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
My name is Sajah Hamdan. I came to the UK to pursue my master's degree just 3 weeks before the genocide began in the Gaza Strip. When I arrived in September 2023, no one told me that I wouldn't see my family again for an unknown period. No one told me I wouldn't return to Gaza after completing my studies, that I wouldn't see my home again turned to rubble. No one told me I would lose many of my friends and loved ones murdered by Israeli bombings. No one told me that Al-Azhar University, where I earned my first degree in dentistry, would be reduced to rubble, like all academic institutions in Gaza, deliberately and systematically destroyed one after the other. Many of my role models, academics, journalists, even stand-up comedians, were assassinated. One of them is Professor Khitam Al-Usayfi, is a pioneering academic female and the dean of the physics department at the Islamic University of Gaza. Then there is Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who remains detained by Israeli forces. I cannot comprehend how someone like Netanyahu, who ordered the killing of thousands of children, moves freely, traveling the world as if he were a peace builder, while someone like Dr. Hussam, who spent his life saving children, is tortured behind bars. It often feels as politicians and decision makers live in a completely different world, far removed from our reality. If I were to list the numbers of children, women, and men killed, I would never finish. The Israeli occupation that murdered 6-year-old Hind Rajab with over 40 bullets is no more than a war machine. But even statistics cannot capture the scale of Israeli violence and terror. No number can describe the pain of women undergoing C-sections and surgeries without any anesthesia, fully conscious, fully aware. Do you know how many layers of skin are cut in such a procedure? Do you know how much pain is endured in such a step? In my master's thesis, I interviewed healthcare workers in Gaza. All of them shared the stories of colleagues from the healthcare staff killed or detained during Israeli military invasions of hospitals. They described bullets and bombs falling while they were treating patients in emergency rooms. They spoke of mass casualties, of patients they had to leave to die because they lacked even the most basic tools. Now, I want to highlight just a few of the countless stories of women whose suffering I have witnessed directly or indirectly during this genocide. First of them is Munira Shaheen, a pharmacist 8 months pregnant, was at home while her family when an Israeli airstrike hit their house. Her fetus died, she was still alive, connected to machines, her heart beating while her body gradually shut down. The room reeked of gangrene. Her organs were failing. There was no medicine, no equipment, and nothing doctors could do. Munira died this morning. If circumstances were different, she could have been saved. Munira is just one of more than 30,000 women murdered during this genocide. Lina Al-Shrafi, another mother with burns covering 40% of her body, has been in MSF Belgium's hospital in Gaza for 4 months. She urgently needs skin grafts and a treatment that don't exist. Despite missing her daughters deeply, Lina refuses to let them visit. She doesn't want them to be terrified by the face they no longer recognize. Lina is just one of thousands of injured Palestinian women left without access to care. My friend, Suad Abu Hasna, 24 years old, has thalassemia. During her last visit to the hospital, her hemoglobin was just 5. There was no blood. There is no blood units, of course. She received only half a unit. The lack of essential medication has caused complications like organ damage, heart enlargement, and fluid in her chest. She has been living in a tent for over a year, waiting for a medical transfer that never came. Suad and Lina are just two of more than 12,000 patients in Gaza who urgently need to be transferred abroad for treatment, yet are still waiting with no clear timeline. 2-month-old twins, Faisal Abu Tair and Fahad Abu Tair, are being raised in hunger. Their mother came to the pharmacy to my mom just yesterday in tears. She had no milk in her breasts due to malnutrition. And even if she found formula today, there is no certainty it will be available tomorrow. This mother is one among more than 1 million women are being starved in Gaza by Israel. So many women I know in Gaza are no longer recognizable in their recent photos. I couldn't recognize them. They are exhausted, sunburnt from exposure in makeshift tents with visible signs of fear and fatigue. Since the genocide began, there has been no electricity or gas. There are no washing machines, no clean water. Women wash their children's clothes by hand every day, cook over open fires, and collect scraps of wood to survive. Yesterday, my mother told me that my father had to cut down the third tree on the land where they are displaced, just to make firewood. This is the daily reality for Palestinian women. Gather wood, set fires, and cook. If they are lucky enough, of course, to find something to cook. Now into education. I don't need actually to list the statistics. Just Google it. Palestinians have among the highest literacy rates in the region, and some of the highest percentages of women with PhDs. Israel knows this. That's why it has deliberately targeted our schools, universities, scientists, and elite academics. This is not just genocide, it's a scholasticide. Children in Gaza have now lost 2 entire academic years, including my own siblings. What is most painful is that many governments, including the UK, are complicit in this destruction by denying students the chance to leave Gaza and continue their education abroad. Around 50 Palestinian students in Gaza, most of whom I know personally, currently hold fully funded scholarships and unconditional offers to study in the UK. Despite being fully prepared, they are unable to complete their visa process because they cannot submit biometrics. The UK refuses to allow them to complete this step in nearby countries like Jordan or Egypt, unlike France, Ireland, and Italy, who have shown flexibility and moral clarity. 7 of these students are UK government scholarship recipients, which is surprising. And yet, the same government has done nothing to ensure they can actually take up their places. This is deeply unjust. My brother Majd and my best friend Sarah are among these students. Both secured full scholarships over a year ago. They should have started their studies in September 2024, but their offers had to be deferred. They are still waiting, hopeful that the UK government will uphold its responsibilities and help them pursue their education. These students have sent letters to the FCDO and the Home Office, but no clear decision has been made yet. If action is not taken urgently, they risk losing their opportunities entirely. Yesterday, I spoke to my father. I told him I would speak in the parliament and asked if he had any message. He said, yes, we are starving, but food is not our top goal. What we need is complete freedom for Palestine. My family is starving, like thousands of families in Gaza, who can no longer find protein or even basic carbohydrates. I lived in Gaza for 25 years under blockade, but this is unlike anything I have ever experienced. Even during the harshest attacks, the situation was never this catastrophic. There is no flour unless you survive the Israeli-American aid distribution points. which are nothing more than traps designed to shoot and kill young Palestinians and the children. Yes, we need humanitarian aid, but that's only a temporary solution. It's only like you treat the symptom without going to the root cause, without going to the main disease, which is the occupation. The permanent solution is the end of the Israeli occupation and the complete freedom of Palestine. Gaza has endured 18 years of a blockade and over 600 days of genocide, designed to break our will. They want us so preoccupied with food, water, and shelter that we forget we are humans. But we will not forget we are human beings. We deserve to live free, and we will be free, inshallah.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. We see on TV and we hear on the radio that it's quite something to listen to first hand testimonies is hard. Ooh. But we will be free. We have to carry on and we have to fight for the freedom of Palestinians. I think, you know, it's probably the longest occupation of current times. It is unacceptable that any people, whatever race or color or religion, should live under a different standard to the standard that we hold dear in this country. We believe in international law. I think this was the biggest shock for me. There is no comparison of my suffering with my colleagues and my friends and my sisters here. But my biggest shock was to be fully integrated into British society. I grew up in Berkshire. I went to brilliant school. I went to university. I did my master's degree. I traveled the world. I went to India. I went to Egypt. Went to Dubai. I lived in Dubai. And then when you are then politically active, you believe everything is fair and just, and everybody talks about justice, fairness, law and order. This is the country of law and order. And you believe it because you haven't seen any different. So when the situation started to escalate, of course, the Palestine question has been there. My own father was thrown out of Jerusalem when he was 6 years old in a village called Deir Ayyub. On a one night, the Jewish forces at the time, before Israel was created, came into Deir Ayyub. And the only reason I know about the story is because Ilan Pepe, the Israeli historian, has written it in his book. My father never told me about it. I think for some of the other generations, it's just too painful. When I read the book quite recently, just when the escalation of events in Gaza took place, I found out that two of my great aunts and uncles were shot dead, 6 and 9 years old, in front of my father. He was 6, and they were all celebrating the opening a new school in the village. They'd gathered the money, and they're opening a new school. They had money for the teachers, and it was a joyous occasion when they were invaded and shot. So, and for the Palestinians, education has always been a very precious tool. This is why so many families have engineers and doctors. It's what every family aspires for. They want their children to be doctors and engineers. So the last 2 years has sort of opened wounds for some of us, British Palestinians, didn't know they existed. And in my case, being in a political party that peddles justice and peddles fairness and peddles, law and order and humanitarian laws, the minute it came to Palestine, suddenly it became, well, we're not quite sure. What do you mean you're not quite sure? There is a, in the US, the Democrats have come up with this, term. It's called PIP, Progressive Accept Palestine. Progressive Accept Palestine. And I think that described my feelings when I was in the Labour Party. I was getting very frustrated. I was listening to the leadership peddle one idea on Ukraine, and literally the polar opposite on Palestinians. If Russia was to be sanctioned, Israel was to be supported. The targeting of civilians is crime against humanity when Ukraine. The targeting of civilians is Israel has the right to defend itself. And it just kept going on and on and on. And I think so many of us got so frustrated, so angry, and we didn't know, how it's just absolutely catastrophic to the belief of living 40 years feeling that you knew the country you lived in, you knew the people that you were with in the political parties, and suddenly everything just collapses. But there is hope. We are here. I found a new journey. I'm very happy to be in the Liberal Democrats. I feel that they have come out on the moral side of this, even though it is difficult. We know how hard it is in the lobbying that goes on behind the scenes of politicians and the intimidation of academics. We've had a Conservative Member of Parliament talk about what's happened to him when he spoke on Palestine. So, but I think that it is time that the British parliamentarians, all of them, follow the lead of the parliamentarians in the political party I'm in, because they're not wavering on international law, and that's what everybody wants to see: fairness and justice. No one wants to see civilians killed on either side. We are, as Palestinians, we've accepted Israel's existence. We just do not accept less values, human rights, civil law for the Palestinians. It's equal, equal, equal for everybody, whether you're British, Israeli, Palestinian, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, atheist. That is exactly the British value, and that's what we expect in this Parliament from everybody, and that's what my colleagues here also expect. So hopefully the path forward after this massive disaster that's happening in front of and unfolding in front of our eyes, hopefully there is a path forward, and we have to keep fighting for that path. We have no choice. We've got children, we've got women. We have to keep talking about it and fighting for it, and hopefully justice will prevail. Thank you. So we'll go into a Q&A. Questions and from anybody on the floor. Yes, please. Hang on, let's get you the microphone. So yeah, you will see.
Is there any evidence that the IDF is committing rape as a weapon of war?
There are reports. There have been reports, and in fact, there was a minister. Do you know the name of the minister? It was last summer that he was saying that rape should be used, and it shouldn't be punishable. Rape of Palestinians shouldn't be punishable because it was going on in a prison. And there was an IDF soldier who broke the silence, and he leaked conversations or images, and because those were leaked, it became a conversation, and a minister said that it should be legalized. So they were actually trying to punish the person who leaked it, not the perpetrators of the crime. So with
Aman was following these cases very closely, by the way.
so, okay, I'll pass to Aman.
Yes. So French reports said that multiple Palestinian women in Gaza have been raped by the IDF soldiers. On the other hand, there has been some footage for the people taken hostages from Gaza that they have been raped in prisons, raped by IDF soldiers and raped by dogs as well. And this caused a lot of health problem and as well as trauma for them. Um, as Sam said, to bring this to the surface and to kind of expose these things, you will be questioned and you will be investigated. But as far as the footage showed, and it's all over the social media, anyone with strong heart and he's able to watch it, they can go on YouTube and watch of dogs raping Palestinian prisoners, and as well as the French report of them raping Palestinian women and girls.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, please, go ahead.
All right, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for this event. And I'd just like to ask, you mentioned it's like one thing in Ukraine, one thing for Palestine. You mentioned PEP, progressive except Palestine. And in terms of the intersectionality of war, from the top of your head, can you possibly give us any idea of like the differences in terms of like what we see like Western governments' attitude to women and children in Ukraine in comparison to Palestine?
Actually, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, of course, I'm not going to get into the geopolitics of Ukraine and the double standards around it, and the fact that Ukraine just represents a front for Europe to protect, and the interests just aligned, unlike what happened with the Palestine conflict. But what I wanted to say was just on a popular level, on how how people leveraged the protection of Ukrainian women and children, and that became a lot more popular, even to the extent that women carrying weapons fighting the Russians, I've seen those images been glorified across social media, and actually almost honored, as opposed to whatever photos, similar photos you would see from Palestine, for example. But at Goldsmiths, when I was a master's student, I remember we studied a case. There was a test that has been done on Save the Children ads, where they tested different children. Some of them looked more Middle Eastern, as in brown skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and other ads which featured more light features, as in as you know, Palestine, at least the Levantine area, will have all sorts of colors and all sorts of people. You can never look at one person and say, well, you look like you're from Palestine, for example. There's no way. You shouldn't be doing that anyway. But the ad that featured the blonde kid did, I remember something ridiculous, 12 times as well better than the ad that featured in raising funds and raising donations. So that's a big element of that. The fact that people can actually popularize and humanize people who look like them and look like their children who are prepping to go to school, it's human nature. It shouldn't be, but it's human nature to just this kid looks like my kid, therefore I identify with them a little bit more. But this was the first thing that came to my mind with this. This is for me, I think it's a big part of it. But again, the second part of it is all the propaganda that's around it that made it sound like it's Europe's and the first world's and the entire world's moral responsibility to stand for Ukraine. But the same thing, I'm pretty sure we've seen from, I think, Associated Press or something. There were photos from the Israeli attacks on Palestinians, historic photos that were circulating as misinformation on social media, which this is something that I work very closely with, and they were actually, like there were Israeli attacks, and they were circulating as Russian attacks. They looked very similar, and people believed that those were Russian attacks, but they were Israeli attacks on Palestinians, and they were circulating in big news agencies. So yeah, I think it's complex. There are many layers of it, but the fact that most people engaged more just on a moral, just human level is just the fact that humans just relate more to or put more value on white-looking or white people. And the other one is just, politically things aligned, and therefore we can morally bend any reasoning around it. I mean, they used human rights to invade the Middle East for the longest time, and every time sometimes I remember I listened to Tony Blair when I was trying to get into politics, and I was like, dude, I'm in Palestine. Like, I know this is not true, but I'm almost convinced. Like, I think we need saving. Thank you so much. Like, that's not true, but it's just like the way people use morality sometimes to. It's insane, and that's propaganda, and that's the humans for you. And yeah, it's been something that we're trying to get our mind, our heads around, and trying to understand, but maybe you'll help.
I'll just add a quick point. The main difference, because they were think they are superior, is because they are white, not my words. The Bulgarian Prime Minister, he described the Ukrainian asylum seeker as educated, intellectual, they read books. And the CBS News, they described them as civilized. So we are the uncivilized, uneducated people who don't deserve to live, or we don't read books, so we don't deserve to live, in their opinion. And that leads you to the belief that I was speaking about at the beginning, that for every rule, for every law, there is an exception, and that's the Palestinian citizen. There is human rights law, there is international law, but there is exception for that, you being Palestinian. That exception allowed the Ukrainian asylum seekers to come and be settlers in the West Bank. They were offered places in settlements. But that superiority led the Israeli to close the shelter in their faces when they were heading to shelters. And now we're speaking politics, but this is facts. When they were heading to shelters to hide from the Iranian rockets, the shelters were closed in front of the Indian workers, in front of the Bangladeshi workers, and in front of the Ukrainian asylum seekers. And that shows you that you deal with entity or institution that they think that they are superior than the whole world. And they act like they own the world, they have the decision, they own the money, they got everything, and everyone should obey.
Thank you. You okay? Shall we take another question, or did you want to say anything on that topic?
I just want to raise the point that was raised before about the propaganda. I think there are a lot of power dynamics regarding this issue, and that's actually the question that I hope I will have an answer to it through my PhD journey. My research question is what are the factors that hinder the enforcement of the international humanitarian law to protect Palestinians, and especially to protect the healthcare facilities. So I believe that there are many power dynamics, but from my opinion, the most important is the media, because the media played a very critical and dangerous role many, many decades before, beginning from the First and Second World War. So just circulating the Israeli propaganda, highlighting and talking more about their suffer and the details of their suffer against Palestinians, and don't show any of the Palestinian suffer and the opposite aspect. This played a critical role, but after the appearance of the social media platforms and outlets, some of facts have been shown. That's why
a lot of Instagram, like meta platforms, Instagram, Facebook, were censored since the beginning of the genocide because they don't want the facts to be shown to the world. Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for your opening remarks, comments, which are very moving, and we will take them away with us. My question, as we are in the House of Parliament, relates to my own personal shock that the numbers for the vote to proscribe, I won't say the name, although, and I could say I'm opposed to the proscription, not necessarily supporting the organization, I'll just say that clearly, was 385 to 26. And that many of the women in the Houses of Parliament, in the Commons that day, as I understand it anyway, were wearing the suffragette colors, which horrified me, of course. So my question is two levels, if you like. One is, from your experience for the parliamentarians who are here, how do women parliamentarians engage with what is happening to Palestinian women? It's quite true, we all know historically that women and children are the greatest victims of any war, any time, historically. So I'm interested, because of that 385 people who voted not to support protest in that way, many of them were women. And so the issue is related to what's happening to the women in Palestine, women and children in Palestine. And the other question then, if you've got time to address it, so I'm asking about women parliamentarians. Where are they coming from? How could those 385 of women actually even think about not standing up every day in question time, saying? But my other question is related to the processes of how it works in Parliament. There are 2 Liberal Democrats here. I don't think all Liberal Democrats voted against that. I think there was a fancy Dan movement to put in these neo-Nazi, 2 neo-Nazi, groups who want to support Russian imperialism or something of that sort. And that's being used as a reason to explain why parliamentarians voted to agree with the government's decision with regard to prescription. If that's the case, then my question would also be, how well informed are parliamentarians? Sorry. Yeah, all right. But just, it seems to me very stupid that the 385 people took that as a possible reason for not voting. So there's the women question, how do they relate, and what kind of information is being given in Parliament about all of these, about this political situation?
I'm going to try to the Member of Parliament.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one about women. So, and what's happening in this country, which I think is chilling. So if you go on a tour of Parliament, you'll go through St. Stephen's hallway, whatever it's called, and you'll probably be shown one of the statues at the very end, and it has a little plaque on the wall. And that plaque says, you will notice that this statue, the spur, which is the sort of the boot, little bit of metal on the boot, if you were wearing a boot, but of this alabaster statue, has been broken. It was broken when a suffragette chained herself to this statue and she was forcibly removed. There is a plaque in Parliament to destruction of property by a suffragette. Suffragettes were called out as terrorists, they were imprisoned, and some of them did take part in bombing as well. So it is a very violent history, as well as a very, a history that was right in fighting for things.
They were also tortured.
Yes, no, it's very complex. But we have a plaque there celebrating the fact that in the end that won, and it was a righteous and moral cause. And there is a plaque saying there was damage to parliamentary property. We've just had a change to the law last year. One of my constituents was jailed for 5 years for partaking in a Zoom call to plan a climate action. So I've been representing her to get her taken out of maximum security prison following her sentence, to then be brought into an ordinary women's prison. And on appeal, the judge said, and in fact the UN rapporteur said, be very careful, UK, because everybody is watching this, because the sentencing is disproportionate for protest. She and others appealed, and her and others' sentence was reduced around proportionality. Not around what they were standing for, but around proportionality. They were not allowed to use what they were protesting about as any part of their defense. That was denied them. It was not a justification of the moral cause at all. She is now at home with a curfew and under house surveillance for the next 2 years. She's a school governor, was a school teacher, So we were in a chilling, chilling time. I come from, as I said, many years international work. I worked in South America, where I saw the suppression of civil society, of the freedom of the press, and interference in the judiciary. I saw how that was done. On one referendum vote, it was, you can answer yes or no to this one question. Shall we stop bullfighting? Shall we stop the gambling in the casinos that your husbands and your children are going into terrible debt around? And shall we stop these judges for being so independent and actually get the government to appoint the judges? You answer yes or no to those 3 questions. I lived through that. I was leading an NGO, and they brought in administrative stuff, the same that is happening in Gaza right now, the same kind of laws that come in to say it's an administrative thing. If your organization receives money from a government outside of Israel, you will have an 80% tax on you. What government aid money can be used if 80% tax goes to the same government that you are supporting them on peace building, freedom of information, democracy? Fighting for the rights of Palestine. None. So with one fell swoop of one little clause, you actually suppress civil society. That's just gone through parliament in Israel. The same thing has happened just now in Georgia. So in the Russian interference law, it's called the foreign interference law. In Georgia right now, if you are an organization that receives more than 10% of your funding from outside of Georgia, you register as a foreign agent. So these are the same laws, the same tactics that are being used, in authoritarian. So when this amendment, when this clause came for the prescription, the same tactics were used. Will you agree to prescribe? One organization was Kill and Maim All, whatever was their title, and the second was the Russian imperialist movement, and the third one was Palestine Action Now. I refuse to be part of a system that does that. I will not put my name either for or against any of that. Some people did an active abstention. They ran through one to say no to Palestine Action and yes to the other 2. But what happens is they will be counted either as against or for. They'll appear in both. And you'll see some of my colleagues did that. So when some of those 26, you'll see some of my colleagues. If you look at did they vote for, yes, they did as well, because they did an active abstention. I absolutely will not take part in that, especially when we know that our vote doesn't count anyway because we're not in the majority. So not just as a woman, but taking part in those kind of tactics and techniques which I do not subscribe to and I don't think should happen. And I've had to explain that, even to my daughter. I can tell you the first person who came at me and said, "Mum." And I can tell you how hard that is to say, why didn't you stand up against that? It's a very, very hard thing to say, but these are insidious tactics, and I won't be part of that. But we will continue to fight alongside, to fight for the statehood of Palestine, to fight, again, obfuscation about sale of arms, supposedly because it can't be traced, because it all goes through the yes. We know every single piece, every single military piece can be traced. But all of these things we have to fight against. The use, I believe in the rule of law. I do think the exceptionalism is, again, I grew up when actually most of the UK was supporting Palestine. I then went away for 15 years and came back to a very different country and a very different political narrative and a very different media. And I couldn't believe the silence that had happened in terms of the settlement since then. So there has been a big change, and we just have to fight that. Fight back hard, and that's all. Sorry, sir. I know my answer is not an easy one, but there you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You explained that really well, Pippa. Thank you. We appreciate it. I think we all appreciate the explanation.